Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Get ready to be inspired, hear success stories, and learn tips and principles for bringing out the best in everyone.
Hello, everyone. This is Debra at home again. Well, and I'm always working from home, but still staying safe. And I'm really looking forward to introducing you to my guest today. Her name is Christine Hemphill, and she's the Managing Director of Open Inclusion. Also, very proud to say she is one of our partners. We have done a lot of work with her team, and we're very, very impressed with them. But I would have to say one of the things I'm most impressed with is where Christine is joining us from today. And she has a very, very interesting background. And I really want to explore a little bit of that because I got to spend time with her when we went to Geneva during the ILO Global Business Disability Conference that they did, GBDN. And she really told me a little bit more about her life and how her journey took her here. And I think it's very interesting, and especially at a time when people are trying to figure out what's going on in the world. Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing in the world? I think a lot of people are contemplating who they are, where we're going, where they're going. And so I think her journey will inspire you and also show you how life can just throw so many different things at you and you wind up having this really beautiful, interesting life. So Christine, thank you and welcome to the program.
Pleasure. Lovely to see you again, Deb.
Yes. So Christine, tell us a little bit about your journey and please do tell us about where you are joining us from, which I wish I was sheltering in place with you instead of this lovely place I'm in Virginia, but yes.
Mm. So, Christine Hemphill, I am today calling in from France. We actually live in a very small village high in the French Alps, in the Northern Alps, just near Geneva. Yes, as we are in complete lockdown, so we're not meant to leave the house without a note signed and officially government authorised for certain reasons. But I do live about 400 metres from the mountain, so social isolation is quite easy here. If I go for a run at night, the only thing I'm likely to run into is a deer, so they're not too worried.
Oh, and you've sent me some pictures of your runs and they're just stunning. It's
It is
stunning.
lovely.
The scenery is breathtaking there. It's just
Mhm.
so beautiful. So that's a
It's much
blessing.
better than, in fact, I was talking to someone today who had also left London. When I'm not here, I'm based in central London. And when I say central London, I live in a very small flat above one of the busiest roundabouts in central London. So I am very
Extremes.
happy to be spending my time of social isolation here, not in a room that you can kind of swing a cat in and hit every wall. Not that I've hurt a cat.
That's right. That's right. But well, tell us about. We want to hear about open inclusion, but um, I also want you to talk about your journey because yeah, I was really surprised to learn about your background and and how your background actually relates to inclusive design and why inclusive design has just become who you are. And I
Mm.
love the way you think about inclusive design and everything you're doing is very, very innovative, much more so than the work I'm seeing coming from anywhere else. And I had said that to you before, but I'm so impressed with the work that your group does. So tell us your journey because I think it's interesting, especially relevant in these times.
I think it is. It's interesting. I've obviously had a bit more time to stop and contemplate, how you get to where you are at a moment like this when we're all, where we are, and we're really having to live with where we are and having to recognise that we've made the decisions that have got us there, or that things have happened to us that have helped us along that decision tree that we didn't choose. And yes, so for me, I come from a very corporate background. I had worked actually originally in the mining industry. I might not look like I do, but I had a hard hat and I had mining boots that I wore for a number of years in the mining industry, but mainly worked actually up in North Asia, working as in the marketing for one of the largest mining companies in the world, and got to know customers. And actually, that what was very interesting about that period of my life is these were very, very long relationships. Some of the relationships I was responsible for were already 50 years old. So I was just the caretaker of that relationship for a very short period of time that you recognised would go for a very long time, hopefully after I'd left as well. So that idea of really deeply understanding customers and taking their perspectives back into the organisation and reflecting their needs into the organisation so we can supply and support them as best we can in this kind of regular cycle of negotiation and alignment between organisations was something I did right from the very beginning. Actually, one of the other things I think I took from my mining experience, not so many when I'm working in the space I am now, was learning what it is to be different. And not in terms of disability, in terms of physical abilities or cognitive capabilities, but in terms of I'm female, obviously. That's very unusual in the mining industry. I think there were 3 or 4 of us in the career that I chose at the time. So I was in coal sales, and that's 3 or 4 people globally that did that were female. So very, very unusual. I was also white, working in North Asia, and if we think that we have an ownership of racism, that's not true. And I was very young. I was exceptionally young at the time. It was the first job I had out of university, and actually age has a very strong part to play in people's perspective of others in Asia as well. And I think the most important thing is, with all those disadvantages as perceived by others onto me, even when I just did my job and did it well, I don't think I was the most amazing person, but I did my job, and I was very well backed up by my manager, who said, you must deal with her once. If you don't like her, and you know, I've sent you her because she's my best negotiator, but if you don't like her, we'll swap for someone else. And actually, once you did your job with that support, and I needed that support for round one, then people thought you were amazing. I really probably wasn't. I was just young and female and white and reasonably good at my job and did it. But with all those perceived disadvantages, people then perceived your success as being way above ordinary. So that was quite an interesting learning.
It is.
I then
It's
went
a
into
little
banking.
inspirational pornish, you know, so that is fascinating. Yeah. Go ahead.
It was, and it was that whole overseeing what wasn't, you know, it really wasn't that different. But just like that inspirational porn stuff, it's kind of overseeing what's not. It's just, yeah, I'm a person.
Right. That's an
Same
excellent
thing.
point.
Yeah. And then I went through, I loved innovation and got involved in innovation in a very physical form early on. Got involved in some of the new design projects in physical transformation of goods, decided that was the fun bit and moved into innovation. I then took those, that meant I worked for a little while across many fields, but mainly heavy industry, steel, mines, ports, F-111 fleets, and so on, and ended up traveling a lot, learning a lot of industries, loving learning the new, recognizing the power of new technologies. I was involved in my first startup for a digital and online capability for shipping, and just learned the power of these new technologies to transform old problems, and learnt to love that. Absolutely love learning about how we can use what's coming through in powerful ways to solve these unmet needs that customers would have, that if you could stop and listen long enough, you could find the match between the two. So that hasn't changed. I did change industry one more time before coming to design. I went to banking just because we were looking to have a family, and I was traveling a huge amount at the time. Spent most of my life traveling around the world, based in Australia at the time, but spread all across through the consulting company, and then moved to banking because it was very Sydney centric, and they needed people that understood customer, they needed people that understood innovation, they needed people that understood digital, and those 3 things were my space. It sounds very stable and very comfortable, but as things happen, we then had some experience of disability in our family, and that put me on a new path that was not a chosen path, but I've chosen and owned and absolutely loved the journey from there. In a very odd way, it gave me a little experience taking a very different route, and I became a professional triathlete for a short while. And that brought us to Europe in a slightly odd way as well. And when I went back to the corporate workforce 4 years later, I went into digital design and innovation again, across all industries, but still quite heavily finance focused. And we differentiated that agency, which was a brand new agency, on inclusive and accessible design because of the lived experience that I'd seen. Also, just because it's fundamentally valuable. And I am an economist by trade, actually. Don't hold it against me. But I understand the value of this. And what I couldn't understand is how was it that all these other design agencies were trying to compete on, the cutest visual design or the latest, you darkest black t-shirt or the biggest, you know, beard or, whatever it was that they were trying to differentiate on, but actually all looked quite similar when you could fundamentally differentiate a product by how many people could enjoy it and use it and, experience it in a positive way. So back to that customer experience at the core at all times.
So
Yeah.
during this really scary time when everybody is, going home,
Mm,
it seems like that customer experience is even more valuable. And maybe if we had, made the customer a little bit more, it really being customer centric, all of the customers were being valued. Uh,
mm.
we there would be a lot of companies that weren't struggling as much as they are during the coronavirus scares.
Absolutely, Deb. And in fact, I think right at the moment, no organization can know what's happening to their customers or their workforce.
Right.
You can't, because we can't understand how this very new impact has transformed the lives of so many people in so many different ways.
Right.
Whether it's, the changing financial resilience, the changing emotional resilience, or fundamentally the physical resilience and fears that people have, these three layers are very dramatically transforming our customers and our staff workforces. Um, and if we can't keep on top of that because it's moved too fast.
Right.
And the only way we can really respond to that is ask and learn and listen.
I agree. And I'm looking down at my notes because I asked you to send me a couple of questions, and I want to read this one question. How has the speed and suddenness of this change impacted, you know, different employees? Employees with a wide range of experience of disability, health conditions, and other access needs. And I wanted to read it instead of paraphrasing it because I thought that was just a really good point. Because as you just said, we don't know. We don't know about our customers. We don't know about our employees. But
Yeah.
how has what kind of lens should we be putting on this when we're talking about employees with known disabilities, and you know, how does an
Yeah, I
employer
mean,
look
I
at that?
suppose the starting point is there has just been a very significant realignment of value to inclusion. And those organizations that were really inclusive prior to this massive shock hitting the economy and the industry and people physically, um, those organizations that already had more adaptive ways of working with their workforce, of engaging with their customers, that were more inclusive and more respectful of customers or employees being able to select the approach that best suited their needs, they're going to be massively advantaged right now.
Right.
And, you know, we've been saying for a long time that this is value. That value has just, hit an exponential factor that we're not even aware how big it is yet.
Right.
Overnight, not overnight, but in a couple of weeks.
Almost right. Almost overnight. I mean, the
It,
world
period
has
that
changed.
nobody could have expected. Well, I certainly didn't. Bill Gates might have, but I'm not Bill Gates.
I don't think anyone could have anticipated how big this was going to get, and we're not done yet. And
No.
but it is interesting because the companies that did pay attention to true inclusion and diversity and the value of inclusion of all of us, they are well ahead of the game. And trying to catch up in this environment is really tough. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think backing it up to really seeing how bad people are being impacted now because they don't have the right technology. Their internet is not dependable. They have, they're splitting their work time as caregivers and as, in the biggest sense of the word. And they don't have the right tools at home. but anyway, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how we do that. But before we go down that path, let's talk a little bit, introduce the audience to your company, Open Inclusion.
Yeah. So Open, we set up 5.5 years ago. Basically, after that experience in digital design, I decided the fun part was the accessible and inclusive design. I saw that fairly quickly. That was the bit that just actually it sung to every part of me. You know this,
Right.
Deb.
Your purpose.
It really it is innovative. It is customer centered. It is valuable. It's fun, and it's actually there's another part to it besides all of that, which are just very much me. There was another piece of it, which is I also thought it wasn't being very well done at the time. And I don't think
I
that
agree.
people were putting the customer at the core. They were putting rules at the core, compliance and standards and guidelines. And let me not disrespect any of that. They're all really important, and it's absolutely valuable to have a baseline that we all understand. But actually, the delightful part of experience of really putting a customer at the core and then allowing that customer to be who they are fully, whether that's as a customer or a staff member, but letting them bring their kind of whole self to that experience and see them their whole self in that experience, that wasn't being done very well. And I saw that as just a great opportunity to do something different and do something new and add something not huge. We don't want to be a large organization. We're an impact first organization. We just want to have a significant impact to allow others to take those ideas and run them as far and fast as they can.
I agree. I agree.
And I suppose the one thing I should mention, which you're very aware of, the jewel in the center of our organization is we have a user-centered panel of over 500 people who either identify as disabled or over 65 or tick both those boxes. And that allows us to get very regular insight that gives us this constant fuel of ideas to keep seeing things differently, to keep understanding differently, and to keep up to speed with where people's expectations and desires are today, not 5 years ago when someone set a standard or wrote a guideline. So that allows us to kind of keep very fresh. And in fact, back to this current experience, we've just kicked off a piece of ethnography that we're going to run as long as this period goes. We don't know how long it is, but we're going to just do this longitudinal study across our research panel so that we know that we don't know right now either. Nobody does.
Right.
But we're
Right.
going to open those listening posts so we can understand where the friction is, how it's arising, who has barriers, where they are, so that we can just feed that out to the organisations that are trying very hard to do the right thing right now, but don't have that fuel of insight to feed it. And we're just doing that off our own bat because we know how important that is.
We're doing it in a smaller scale, but we're also doing that because we're finding, well, it's not really in a smaller scale, it's in a different scale, I should say. And we're finding things that we were not, some things we expected, some things we're running into problems that we did not expect. And we're trying to figure out, make sure that it's in the hands of the people that can do something about it. So we're also looking at it not just from the workplace, but we're looking at it very broadly, people with disabilities that might be getting in trouble and things like that in unexpected ways. So I think the study that you're talking about will, even though it's, and I shouldn't say even though, because I know a lot of the people are in the United Kingdom, but even though some of the laws and stuff are different in the United States, it doesn't matter. The needs are the same and what we need to do. So it doesn't really matter in some ways where a person is located. I think there's benefit in talking to people that are located in different times. We have a customer that we're helping right now, and a lot of my staff is global. And so they were asking about their particular footprint that they were interested in one specific country, but we gave them guidance from other countries because we felt that particular country was in a developed country, even though we're all developing now. But I thought that our staff that are in the developing countries could really add so much more insight to things we hadn't thought about. And we found that to be the case. So I think it's very important that the work you're doing. What advice, Christine, would you give to, businesses and employers that are trying to adapt to what happened. How can they adapt and improve their workplace in these new conditions, especially when, everything is exploding and with the intensity and the problems. And
Yep.
it's a real fascinating time. Even technical support, we don't necessarily want to send individuals into individuals' homes during these dangerous times, and so a lot of technical support is having to be done virtually. And once
Mhm.
again, if the tools that you're using are not accessible, and it's not accessible on the other end, it just makes things so much more difficult. That's just one thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, just that thought of, you said, the virtual support, that's all good and well. Um, if things are accessible from
Right.
receival of the package through to use. And actually, we've done some work in the past, particularly with things like voice interfaces, where the voice interface itself is incredibly inclusive once it's set up and being used.
Right.
But that process from unpackaging through to setting it up, getting it ready, and having it personalized, ready for use, that's the bit that's very difficult. And so, one thing I suppose I would really advise any organization that is thinking about their products, that they consider that product journey end to end, not the product in use, but the product from arrival to disposal and potentially beyond, and how the inclusion lines can be redrawn at any part in that. And that right now, again, is one of those things that it was always important, but it's become critical at this point in time. I think in answer to the question, a few things to think about. Firstly, practical considerations. So just that, how do we set people up to be effective at home? There are some really challenging issues with too few staff left, supporting too much in some industries. So
Right.
particularly industries like banking, you've got staff on leave, staff as carers, staff that can't work remotely because access to data centres and obviously security of data is very high, so that they just can't access that in a remote way. Um, and yet the demand has gone up above any of the stress tests that have ever been run. So you've got some industries that are completely overwhelmed. Supermarkets are another one. Everything's gone to online, and they're completely overwhelmed in that space. And then it's just a really robust prioritization and saying all those campaigns that we were going to run for spring campaigns or this or that all dropped. What are the core critical journeys for people today? And this is just as true for the workplace as it is for consumers. What are the critical journeys that we need to get right so that our workplace are most effective in their roles now? And what are all the ones that we can just ignore because they were nice, they were priorities prior to this, they're not now. And then once you're focused on that, getting practicalities right, the social elements right, and then management and support right. So the practicalities of setting people up and being effective in a home, and then adapting that in the ways that are required for individuals, recognizing that we all require adaptations. So as much as possible, offering that to all, and then offering specific adjustments for those that's not sufficient for. Um, Making sure the social interactions are working. Not just, there's a lot of conversations at the moment about, oh, we need all this social stuff because we're more isolated. And that's absolutely true, particularly if people, that don't have a family to live with and don't have that social interaction in their home now. And, but recognizing there's some people that might actually benefit from not having that social time at work all the time. And so there's a whole variance there. And
Yeah.
to provide that support in a way that people can opt into that. And I think there's also a part of the social side, really listening effectively when you don't have the physical communication, to learn how to manage meeting etiquette in a way that supports all communication styles. And whether that's someone with a disability who actually doesn't talk, so say someone who's got a tracheotomy, or someone who needs to be able to engage in a written format, someone who or someone who's using sign language or other formats, giving people the options to come in the way that suit them, and ensuring that meeting etiquette is there, that whether it's someone who's just a little more introverted or whether it's someone who communicates in an alternative way, that they have the appropriate space in a virtual format, just as you would have created for them in in a workplace that you had prior to this.
Yeah,
So
I was talking to a colleague the other day, and she reads lips, and everyone wearing masks are making it very difficult. And a lot of people don't. She's out, as she says, but a lot of people still don't realize that she reads lips, and so um, it's. Just things that we don't think about like that are very interesting, really considering, full inclusion of everyone. And it's, you know, we really have to think differently, but in the same way, maybe the same as we've been saying all along, because if things are accessible to your employees and to your customers, this experience that we're going through right now is going to be so much easier. You're going to have there's so many barriers that have already been broken down. And I see a lot of people starting to talk about how they can help you be accessible, and you can do it right now. Some of the problem is, though, that depending upon the access, that the getting access, there's just so many access issues right now in the biggest sense of that word. And
yes.
so, where would you suggest somebody that's going, company that's going through all these moving pieces, and then you say, and by the way, you also need to be accessible. How can they prioritize that when everything else, and why should they? And I know how I would answer, but I would love to know how you would answer that.
The answer is, don't be blown by the winds of other people's needs. Be blown by the winds of your needs. So start by looking at your workforce, not a generic workforce, and have someone selling a generic product to any workforce. Start by listening and understanding your workforce. And actually, just as we're creating listening posts into our panel, create listening posts into your staff to understand and particularly look for those at the edges of experience. So those with very young families, those that are carers for very old people, those where that inclusion line we were talking about right at the beginning has moved. What was a real consideration for barriers of inclusion 2 months ago, such as physical workplace barriers, you don't need to care about them now. Take all the energy that was going there. You can worry about that again once you're going back into the workplace, but you can't even get anyone in to fix it now. So don't worry about that. Move all of it where these new barriers are, but you need to understand the new barriers for your team, your workplace, and the core elements of work that you're doing now and really needing to prioritize, so that all of that energy goes where it's going to have the greatest impact on the people most excluded at this moment. And that's so then when external suppliers come in and say, oh, I can do this for you, I can do that for you, they may well be able to do something for you that's incredibly valuable to you, but you know that yourself. You're not being influenced by their need, you're being influenced by your staff's needs.
Yeah, I had a customer that came to us, and they also came to another company, and the other company, they actually scared them, because they were like, wow, we felt like we were going to have to get married, and we were going into a multi-year relation, and it just sort of scared them. And then of course it's the States, and so there was just that sort of implied threat of litigation,
Mm-hmm.
and it really scared this customer. And we had commented from a very different perspective, partnering. How do we, what barriers should we focus on now? Which I thought was a really good point that you were making. And I do think it's really important for people to remember that if it feels like somebody's trying to scare you, just stop and back away. Don't make a decision right now. But I don't like
Genuinely,
the fear part, but I know
yeah.
some people are doing that.
Mm.
um they're especially in this time, so I think that there's some real practical ways that they can do this. And but I really like the advice you just gave, just sort of thinking about what your needs are, and your teams.
Yeah. And what you don't know, if you need someone to come in and help you find out, because sometimes your staff don't want to talk directly to you, and for any organisation, there's quite often, not for any organisation, for many organisations, there's often an ability network, a group of an advocacy group within the organisation for people with disabilities. Um, they only represent a very, very small proportion usually of people who have access needs that are sitting within an organisation. But that can be a starting point just to start the communication. And sometimes you do require, whether you need an independent third party to come in and just help you listen openly in a way that reduces the fear. Your comment about fear, I am so concerned about anyone ramping up fear right now. We all have enough fear in our lives. The last thing we need is any more coming in our doors. Can we all just work to reduce each other's fears, not increase them?
Yes.
And
well said.
if we can do that, we can be more conscious about our decisions. We can be more calm about our decisions. We'll probably make better decisions that work better for us as an individual, as a member of our organisation, as our member of our community. So, surely we can all step up a little bit in responsibility around that at the moment.
I agree. Well said. Christine, for audience members that still don't completely understand how you put things together, do you mind talking about a few projects that you've done in the past and how it works? I mean, you don't have to do shout outs, company names unless you want to, but I think it would help the audience if they could, if you would explain a few projects.
No, absolutely happy to. In terms of the way we work, we nearly always start by asking the getting a piece of insight from the organisation. If that's in the workplace, and here we're really focused on the staff side, helping generate insight from the workplace to understand what is the experience like as a staff member with any experience of disability. And when we talk about disability, we don't just talk about people who have lived experience of disability personally, but they may have lived experience as a carer, as a parent, as a manager, or as a peer of someone with a disability. And that is all relevant lived experience of disability when you're looking at how do you improve a workplace and how do you improve people's efficiency and capability and teams' efficiency and capability at work. So we start by asking and learning specific to that environment, where are the barriers? Where are the challenges? One particular project we're doing at the moment with Graham Whippy, who you know well,
Yes,
who's our wonderful guy. He's our workplace inclusion expert. And we're doing a survey into one of the larger supermarket chains in the UK and really understanding what is that experience from that full circle of experience of disability for that organisation. They've got a huge diversity agenda there. They have a very active ability network. They understand, a lot of the challenges, but their understanding has only come from those who are self-identified, and they've got very little understanding of the other experiences of disability, whether it's people who don't choose to identify, who might not even know they have a need, but there's some barriers in the workplace that just keep popping up. Or whose experience is, through a peer, a colleague, someone that they manage, someone they're managed by, or from the home. So that's the understanding. From that, we then work with the organisation. That gives us an insight. We assess that, we prioritise that with the organisation around their priorities and their strategic drivers. And then there's really two ways we look at an organisation can make a change. There's kind of the universal design approach to change, which is, right, we've got a whole lot of people that are finding our culture really difficult and the way we communicate in that culture or the way we accept in that culture really difficult. We need to start to make some very proactive decisions that are going to move that dial and from a leadership point downwards, start to expose that and make a change to that. It might be that some of the policies are, the intent is all there, but the policy gets in the way of itself. And it's just very clunky and complex. And that we identify that actually that 6 months from I've identified I've got a barrier to that barrier being removed with an adaptation is just too long for the organisation to cope with and for the individuals to cope with, and it's having a real impact on teams' efficiency, individuals' efficiency, and so on. So wherever we find those kind of patterns, you can organisationally move that, and you can make those universal changes that everyone will benefit from. The other side of, and that's, I'll just quickly mention, there's leadership, there's policy, there's people, which is the management and skills, processes and culture are the pieces within there. And their measurement and metrics tell you where you're at with any of those. On the other side is the individual adjustments, the workplace adjustments that an individual might need, that they need something specific to them, as opposed to that the organisation can just know ahead of time and set that up. And that workplace adjustment process that Graham, has really honed over many, many years of many organisations, is all about starting from the individual, understanding where those needs are popping up, how they're popping up, in what environments, getting the assessment at the right level, whether it's self-assessment and self-help for the easy to solve ones, organisation assessment and help, or getting an expert to come in and do a formal adjustment, then going through a process with the case management underpinning it all the way, so that it's managed and the outcomes are measured at the end of it, so the organisation can just learn over time and make sure that they're optimising, not just for the individual, but also for the team that the individual sits within. Because we all, essentially, our outcomes are generally through a team environment in the workplace. So there's an individual adjustment, but there's also quite often a team adjustment to make sure that that team efficiency is optimal.
I agree.
So they're the two routes.
Yeah. And a few, sorry, I think we had a lag over us, but a few comments to make. First of all, I just want to, for the US people listening to this, when Christine talks about adjustments, that is the same as what we call accommodations here in the United States, just to make sure that y'all know that. And also, I think I want to make a point about, I want to pick up on a point that you made, a very eloquent point that you made as you were talking about this. I remember having a customer here in the States, and they had a board member that was blind, and this board member was an amazing woman, and she read Braille, and she was giving this transportation, the state agency transportation busing, she was giving them a hard time because the bus schedules were not accessible, which is appropriate. Thank goodness she was doing that. So what they did was they went out and they spent $25,000 at the time to make all of their bus schedules Braille. Well, then they realized that most people that are blind don't read Braille, and bus schedules can change every single day. And they actually could have just, created them in an accessible Word format and done it out in HTML. They could have done it a way that was more accessible to everyone, and it was also so much cheaper. They wound up just wasting that $25,000 because it was a snapshot, and Braille is, doesn't change. So I just thought that was a good point that you mentioned, that when you have your ERGs for people with disabilities, remember that even though these employees have valuable information, everybody, not everyone that is blind operates in the same manner, the same way as not all women do things the same, and not all, it's the diversity and the innovation. So that's something, I wanted, to point out also. And that's also one reason why I like the process that your team goes through, because you look for those opportunities and you look for ways to enhance or create processes that will not only solve that particular issue, but it will open it up so it's more valuable to all of the employees. And one more point, I remember one time hearing a story from Ernst & Young, and that they had an accountant that was deaf and was having problems in the team meetings. And so they came up with a very clever technical solution to solve this particular accountant's problem, but it also wound up making the entire team so much more productive, because they were like, well, we want that too, because the entire meeting notes, for example, were, captured. And so it made
so often the case, Deb.
Yeah.
So often the case. And in fact, just as a tiny example of that, we ran 3 focus groups on Tuesday, obviously all remotely, for a particular client. We always caption everything we do. We do that for anyone who's hard of hearing as part of the focus group, but we also do it for people who think differently and just need that extra bit of time to not just hear, but to see it. And of course, it gives us notes of the full session afterwards. And it's one of those things that, yes, you know what, it's a little bit more cost to put it on, Actually, it works perfectly in Zoom, so you can have it live captioning running perfectly in Zoom, so it works in a remote format really nicely, but it's just makes it better for everyone. And so much of inclusive design, that's the case. So where it's appropriate, we always suggest that you just put it there that's available to everyone, that people don't need to kind of put their hand up and say, I need this now.
Right.
Obviously, there's cost involved, so that's not true of everything.
Well, not always though. I just realized late to the game that the other day we had a Google chat and you can turn the captions on.
Yes.
The entire time for free during Google Chat, you can run captions the entire time. Now, one thing that they don't do, and this was a business decision that they made, is it doesn't create a file that you can go back and get later. And they did that for security and privacy reasons. But I was delighted to see that I can have a conversation on free with Google Chat and you have the captions running the whole time. So Christine, I know that I want to make sure that you have time. I want to let you finish your comment, but I also want to make sure that you're talking about how people can find open inclusion, and you can, your website, and I want to give you time to, make final comments, but I'm just being conscious of the time, and I want to make sure that for sure you give us your website and your social media and tell the audience how they can, work with your organization, but also let you make a final comments that I give you the mic.
Thank you, Deb. Just one comment on the captioning, actually, just because it's a really good example. I think it's a beautiful example, actually. So thank you for bringing that up. As an example, if I go to someone else's meeting or meetup or session and they don't have someone doing live captioning, I use Microsoft PowerPoint and I put on the AI captions, and it
Cool.
subtitles it automatically. And that's just a habit of mine because I understand the value of it. It's not as accurate as paying to have someone there doing it at the moment. It probably will get there, but at the moment there's still an accuracy gap. But actually, it's a fabulous universal solution that is there for all of us to use all of the time. So let's not think that there has to be a cost. It's just you choose what layer you need to be at depending on the environment you're in and the specificity of needs in that group that you're delivering to.
Well
So
said.
thank
We
you
also,
for noting that. Yeah.
yeah, we make sure that the show is always captioned,
Yeah.
and we pay for it because of who we are. So we choose in certain
You
circumstances.
choose
But
accuracy.
right, but it's things like that, Christine, that a lot of the employers don't even know that wonderful tools are available right now from mainstream people like Google and Microsoft, which are
That's right.
two, and Zoom. So that's why it does help to bring in experts like you too. So anyway, speaking of that, tell
Thank you.
us how we could. bring
Yes,
in
so
experts to
we're
your
very easy to find. Open Inclusion is just openinclusion.com, and we're the only open inclusion out there, so you're welcome to just find us. In terms of myself, Christine Hemphill, I'm on LinkedIn. My Twitter handle is Open for Access, and you can find us on either of those. And just as a point of note, I'm about to put out a blog about the impact of coronavirus on the current environment, and particularly for organisations struggling with a process to think through this moment. We're sharing a process that we think of, so that anyone can pick that up and take that. And obviously, as you would expect from us, it starts with ask, whether it's your staff or ask your customers, and then prioritize and understand and choose from there. But just recognizing that these are extraordinary times. It is difficult for everyone at this time. Nobody expects anyone to be perfect, I think, is something just to mention right now. There is quite a lot of forgiveness in the community because we all understand that organisations and individuals in those organisations are under extraordinary pressure.
Yes.
We don't know what's happening to that staff member who might have had a screaming child on her ankle at the time that she's trying to write a web response or something. So a little bit of extra leeway that everyone could give, I think, would be really well respected at the moment. And then really thinking about, with the effort and energy we have, just focusing it on where the exclusion happens now, and where that priority is given those core journeys that we really need, making our staff efficient and effective in their work home places now, which is their workplaces, and then supporting our customers with the core journeys that are still highly relevant or even more relevant to them at this moment in time.
I agree. I'm going to just make one quick comment and then we'll end the episode. But I also hope that employers and corporations are realizing that after you get all the bugs worked out, your employees are going to want to work from home more. So I'm hoping that when we go back to our new normal, that employers continue to understand this is an accommodation that can help all employees with and without disabilities be more productive. So we're going to learn a lot from this. But Christine, thank you so much for your work and for joining us today. And we're very grateful to the audience, and special thanks to my producer, Doug Foresta, who is a coronavirus survivor. And everybody stay safe. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Deb. Bye.
Thank you, Christine.